says crime does not pay? As everybody knows, this was just came on down the pike on the news feed. But Bill Cosby looks like he is going to spend the rest of his life a free man, because he's 83 years old now, with one foot in the grave and the other on a banana peel. So whether he ever gets tried again for a sexual assault thing, I don't know. It's doubtful. But anyway, the Supreme Court in Pennsylvania decided to overrule his sexual assault conviction. And the court said Wednesday that they found an agreement with a previous prosecutor that prevented him from being charged in the case. The disgraced actor has served more than 2 years of a 3 to 10 year sentence at a state prison near Philadelphia. He had vowed to serve all 10 years rather than acknowledge any remorse over the 2004 encounter with accuser Andrea Constant. And you know, he's a goddamn psychopath, a sociopath. And I had heard stories about him before this thing with Constant ever happened. I had heard stories because I lived in Reno, Nevada for 26 years. And Bill Cosby was a frequent headliner in Reno and in Tahoe. I never did see him. You know, he'd be right down the street from where I lived. You know, like at the El Dorado or Harrah's or whatever that was there at the time. And I just never got around to watching him, and much less go to Tahoe. But he was a regular figure here or there in the Reno area. And he and his wife, Camille, his long-suffering wife, Camille, donated a lot of money to the University of Nevada, Reno. I don't know how much it was, but he was a big donor to that university. That's my alma mater. And I had bachelor's and master's degrees from there. But anyway, that's all an aside. He was big in northern Nevada. But anyway, he's, you know, he admitted he did this. Okay, he did. But the problem was, it was a civil suit. And, of course, they're supposed to be under a gag order. So he thought if the truth would never come out. And then it was ruled at his trial that deposition could come out. And, of course, he admitted he did that shit with women. So he was a damn rapist. So even if he never goes back to prison again, he's a marked man. He's a pariah like O.J. Simpson and Robert Blake and any of these other celebrities that got away with crimes. You know, it isn't even going to matter. He's history. And so, anyway, let's see, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court said that the testimony, Andrea Constant, and they allowed 5 other accusers to testify at the retrial about their experiences. So it was prejudicial, they found. They said that the testimony tainted the trial, even though a lower appeals court had found it appropriate to show a signature pattern of drugging and molesting women. And prosecutors did not immediately say if they would appeal or seek to try Cosby for a 3rd time. So they might appeal it. The justices voiced concern not just about the sex assault cases, but what they saw as the judiciary's increasing tendency to allow testimony that crosses into the line of character attacks. Well, you know what? Don't do it. Don't fucking rape women while they're drugged. Don't rape them at all, drugged or not. But in Cosby's case, one of his appellate lawyers said prosecutors put on vague evidence about the uncharged conduct, including Cosby's own recollections in his deposition about giving women alcohol or Quaaludes before sexual encounters. So he admitted he did it. I mean, he was guilty of sin. We all know it. In May, Cosby was denied parole after refusing to participate in sex offender programs during his nearly 3 years in state prison. He has long said he would resist the treatment programs and refuse to acknowledge wrongdoing, even if it means serving the full 10-year sentence. But anyway, you know, I'd heard the stories. I think I kind of got off on a tangent, and I didn't finish my thought. But I had heard those stories about him for years. Okay, when he was headlining in Reno, so I'd heard about it. That didn't surprise me when he was sued, and then later he was charged with all this stuff. So it was old news. But he was never going to admit that he did any of it, even though he did do it, because his ego can't take it. And he's, you know, and like I said, he's 83. He's probably going to be a free man for the rest of his life. But that's one area where crime pays. If you're rich and a celebrity, crime ultimately pays. And then there was a story that was of local interest, but it made international headlines, and it was even made the Daily Mail. And this was about a little boy who was found in a bundle. He was obviously murdered. He was covered in blankets and tied with wire and weighted down in Keene Creek, which is near Ashland, which is not very far from where I live. It's about probably 15 miles or so from where I live. And it was believed he was killed around October of 1962. So he was about 2 years old, but his body wasn't found until 1963 when a fisherman found him. And so for years and years, they didn't know who it was. Nobody had ever reported him missing. And he was buried in a cemetery here locally. And then years later, local law enforcement decided to reopen the case because they could get DNA from the remains. And then, of course, genetic genealogy came along. And yes, C.C. Moore and Parabon Nanolabs were involved in identifying who this child was. And it was a little boy with Down syndrome named Stevie Crawford. And his half-brother in Ohio said that he had a young sibling with Down syndrome who went missing. And his mother had traveled all over the country, and she had returned from a trip, and she said they wouldn't have to worry about him anymore. He was all taken care of. Of course, she killed him. You know, he was too big of an inconvenience. And I would read comments like after this story, and others. I could look it up in the Mail Tribune too, because this is where all this story originated. But I'd hear these comments, well, she couldn't take care of him. Oh, you know, she was doing him a lot of good by drowning him. It was murder then, okay? It's murder now. And you don't have a right to kill somebody with Down syndrome. And yes, back in those days especially, kids born with Down syndrome lived on the average of less than 25 years. They died young. Now they live well into middle age or even beyond that. In some cases, it's because of heart issues usually that Down syndrome kids have, if they're severe enough. But this woman got away with murder. I'm making an assumption she killed him. Of course. She died years and years and years ago. And the family's based in New Mexico, I believe. Yeah, it was Keene Creek Reservoir along Oregon 66. So yeah, it was near the Green Springs Road, near or around the Green Springs Road. So it's not that terribly far from where I live here. And anyway, the big break came in December when Jackson County Sheriff's Office received a tip from someone on Facebook Messenger, which they didn't describe. Based on that tip, the boy's DNA sample was submitted to Parabon Nanolabs to generate leads. C.C. Moore, Parabon's chief genetic genealogist, then ran the sample through GEDmatch, the same open-source DNA repository that was used to catch the Golden State Killer, and located two possible siblings. In an interview with investigators, one of the siblings, a DNA-confirmed maternal half-brother in Ohio, said that he had a young sibling with Down syndrome, a genetic disorder that aided in the identification, who was born in New Mexico and went missing. Okay, he was born in New Mexico. How he died and came to be placed in that location remains unclear. A sheriff spokesman said all potential suspects in Stevie's death are deceased. And that's KDRV. Gosh damn, that Daily Mail, they can't get any facts straight. KDVR, what the hell's KDVR? It's KDRV. Meanwhile, Stevie's surviving relatives are planning to have his body transported to Mexico and laid to rest in a family plot. And I would say, I would agree with a lot of people that that kid should not be buried anywhere near that family. He should have just stayed. I think they have him buried at Hillcrest Memorial Park. And that's probably where he should stay, rather than be with a family that didn't do him any justice. Yeah, the other relatives didn't have anything to do with it, but still, you know, they're the last people he probably should be laid to rest with. But anyway, yeah, I thought I'd just talk about old Cosby and this case that made international headlines, because both cases prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that sometimes crime does pay, and you can get away with it. A lot of times it's luck, and a lot of times it's the buck.